It was a day like any other in the splendor of Versailles, where the sun bathed the opulent palace in golden light. But beneath the facade of luxury, shadows moved quietly, whispering of treachery. A cup of wine, once a symbol of celebration, would soon become an instrument of death, and a royal conspiracy would unfold in the heart of the French court. This is the untold story of how a minister's life was tragically extinguished, not by the guillotine, but by the poison coursing through his veins, served by those he trusted most. Before the grand halls of Versailles echoed with music, they would first be filled with a silence more haunting than the dark truths hidden behind every gilded door. But what if history, as we know it, has overlooked the most dangerous game ever played by those who held the power to shape nations? Before we dive into this chilling story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more dark tales from the shadows of history. A powerful minister at the heart of the French court, devoted to serving his king, yet blinded to the lurking dangers among his peers. The corruption of Versailles was not only a matter of power, but one of trust. Through deception, whispers, and broken alliances, the minister finds himself surrounded by enemies, wearing the masks of friends. The scent of perfumed halls cannot hide the bitterness in the air, as a plot unfolds in plain sight, hidden in the elegance of the royal court. His life, though tangled with intrigues and triumphs, is about to be sealed by the silent poison that waits. The end is near, and it will not be swift, but slow, agonizing, a quiet death within the chaos of the royal spectacle. The conspiracy to silence the minister was not born in darkness alone. It was forged by the rivalries, ambitions, and fears of those who surrounded him, people of power who saw him as a threat to their own desires for control. As whispers become louder, the stage is set for his undoing. Each step of the plot is carefully calculated, and the tragic irony is in the minister's own trust, his belief in those who would see him fall. The poison in his wineglass would be his final toast. But would anyone suspect foul play amidst the extravagance of Versailles? The answer is hidden beneath the masks of the court, where every gesture is a performance, every word a weapon. It wasn't just the political factions that viewed him as a threat. They were those closer to him, people he called friends, allies, even confidants, who had their own motives for seeing him fall. Versailles was not a place for the weak-hearted or the naive. It was a place where even the most trusted advisors could turn on you, where a handshake could hide the sharp edge of betrayal. And yet, the minister could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. A quiet dread had begun to settle in his chest, though he could not pinpoint its source. It wasn't just the daily threats he had received, the subtle hints of danger passed through letters or casual conversation. It was something else, something more insidious. The people around him, whom he had once considered allies, were beginning to act strangely. Their smiles seemed colder, their words more cryptic. There were whispers of a conspiracy, of a plot so vast it threatened to unravel everything he had worked for. One evening, as the king hosted another of his lavish gatherings, the minister found himself seated among the highest nobility of the court. The feast was grand, as it always was. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, delicate pastries, and wine from the finest vineyards. Laughter filled the air, and music drifted softly through the hall. But for the minister, it all felt distant, as though he were watching the world unfold around him through a fogged window. He raised his glass, a smile playing on his lips as he exchanged pleasantries with a nobleman beside him. He took a sip of the wine, the same wine that had been poured for him countless times before, always with a smile. He never questioned it. Why would he? This was Versailles, after all. The court was his family, his world, and the king had always trusted him. The first signs of discomfort were subtle. His throat began to tighten. The air around him seemed to grow warmer, thicker, as if the very atmosphere had turned oppressive. A wave of nausea washed over him and his vision blurred. For a moment, he thought he might faint, but then he caught himself, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. And then came the pain, sharp, searing, like a fire igniting in his veins. His hand trembled as he set the glass down, his mind racing. Was it the wine? Had something gone wrong with the food? But no, that was impossible. Versailles had never had such a misstep. He struggled to rise from the table, his head spinning, his limbs heavy as though they were made of lead. The noise of the banquet faded, the faces around him blurring into unfamiliar shapes. All he could hear was the thunder of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears like a drum. He had no idea that in that single moment, his life was already slipping away, silently, invisibly, like a shadow closing in on him. The minister staggered, his mind clouded, as the room around him seemed to spin in slow motion. His vision narrowed, and he could feel the warmth of the wine turning cold in his veins. The laughter of the court, once so vibrant, now felt distant, as though it belonged to another world entirely. He had lived so long in the brilliance of Versailles, among the finest minds and the most powerful figures in the kingdom, and yet in this moment, it all felt fragile, like a grand performance with no script, no audience, no purpose but to end in tragedy. A servant approached him, concerned, but the minister could only raise his hand weakly, a gesture meant to reassure, but which only made his body lurch. His throat felt tight, and the pressure in his chest grew unbearable, as though something was crushing him from the inside out. He tried to speak, to ask for help, but his tongue felt thick, uncooperative. Instead, he found himself sinking back into his seat, too dizzy to rise, too confused to understand what was happening. He wanted to cry out for help, but the words seemed to escape him, vanishing into the air like the whispers of those who had conspired against him. Around him, the scene continued as if nothing had changed. Nobles conversed, servants poured wine, and the music played on, unaware, uncaring of the drama unfolding in their midst. How many times had the minister walked these halls, his mind sharp and alert, his every word a command, his every action a move in a game he believed he controlled? How many times had he sat at this very table, surrounded by those he believed were his friends, his allies? Now, those same allies were silent. Their eyes avoided his gaze. They too had been part of the plan. They too had conspired in the shadows. It was in this moment, as the poison began its slow and agonizing work, that the minister realized the full weight of his isolation. There was no escape. No help would come. The plot that had been carefully woven around him was too intricate, too well executed. In the end, it was a conspiracy forged not in the back alleys or dark chambers of the palace, but at the very heart of Versailles itself, in the very spaces he had thought were his domain. As the first tremors of pain gripped his body, the minister's mind, though foggy, raced through his thoughts. He tried to recall every conversation, every glance, every seemingly innocent exchange he had had in recent weeks. Who among them had betrayed him? Who had made the decision to end his life in such a slow and humiliating manner? Who had served him the cup, his cup, knowing that with every sip he was taking one step closer to death? The bitter taste of the wine lingered in his mouth, its once rich, fruity flavor now reduced to something sharp, metallic, like the taste of blood. He thought of the king, the man he had served so faithfully. Would the king ever know the truth of his death? Would anyone? Or would this just be another tale lost to time, another tragedy to be forgotten in the grand spectacle of Versailles? He could feel his body betraying him, his limbs growing heavier with each passing second. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and his breath came in shallow gasps.
His mind flickered between clarity and darkness, as though he were drifting in and out of some dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The flickering candlelight around him seemed to dance like shadows, mocking him, as if even the very light was conspiring to hide the truth. As he struggled to hold on to his consciousness, a thought flashed through his mind, an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How had he, a man of such intellect and conviction, come to this? How had he become a pawn in the hands of those he trusted most? The very people he had fought for, those he had believed were his allies, were now the ones who would silence him forever. And in his final moments, the minister understood the cruel irony. His death would be just another footnote in the history of Versailles, a tragic end to a man who had believed too strongly in the honor of a court that had long since abandoned it. There would be no hero's funeral for him, no mourners would weep in the streets. His name, though spoken in the most hallowed halls of the kingdom, would soon be erased from memory, just another casualty of the endless game of power and betrayal that was played at the heart of France's royal court. As the last of his strength drained away, the minister's vision dimmed, the faces around him fading into a blur of nothingness. The poison was almost complete now, its work done. He was beyond the reach of the living, his body succumbing to the inevitable. And yet, for just a brief moment, he held on. Perhaps it was a final act of defiance, or perhaps a futile hope that someone, anyone, might finally see the truth, might expose the conspiracy that had claimed his life. But it was too late. The whispers of Versailles had already sealed his fate. As the final breath left the minister's lips, the halls of Versailles continued to echo with laughter and music, unaware of the life that had been quietly extinguished in their midst. His death, slow and painful, would soon be buried beneath the opulent distractions of the royal court, a tragedy without a proper mourner, a story that would fade into legend, obscured by the glamour of a kingdom in decline. But the true cost of his demise was far more than a personal loss. It was a reflection of the darkness that had consumed the very heart of Versailles. Behind every whispered conversation, behind every courtly gesture, lay a truth that no one dared to speak aloud. In a world where power was the ultimate prize, loyalty and trust were luxuries that no one could afford. For the minister, who had dedicated his life to the king, there would be no hero's legacy, no monuments to his vision. Instead, he would be remembered as yet another casualty of a royal court where treachery was commonplace, and death was always a whisper away. The poison that claimed his life was not just a physical weapon, it was a symbol of the larger rot within the monarchy, a reminder of how fragile power truly is. The court of Versailles, with all its grandeur and its beauty, was a house built on lies, where the most brutal betrayals often wore the most refined faces. And as the poison spread through his veins, it was not just his life that was lost, but the hope that perhaps France could be saved by those who still believed in the ideals of a better future. What remains of his story? A dark mystery that lingers in the corners of history, a cautionary tale of a kingdom that could have been great, but instead allowed itself to be destroyed from within. The minister's death was a turning point, the last in a long line of events that would eventually lead to the fall of the monarchy and the collapse of Versailles itself. In the end, it was not just one man that was silenced that day, but an entire world of grandeur and decay, a world that would never be the same again. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history. If you found this story as captivating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories from the hidden corners of the past. Until next time, remember, history is always